everyone, welcome to the 230th episode of the Internet of Things podcast. This is your host, Stacey Higginbotham, and your co-host,
Kevin Toffel.
And we have a stupendous show for you today. We're going to be talking about a brand new consumer-focused water meter monitor. That's a lot of words. And we're going to talk about IKEA's brand new HomeSmart business unit. Plus, a little bit more news from IKEA about those smart blinds everyone's waiting for. Kevin migrated from his Nest to a Google account, and he's going to tell you all about what to expect. And Amazon wants Madam A in every car, and we have thoughts about that. Plus, new products from SimpliSafe. MIT has created an underwater sensor that can do its own energy harvesting. And we've got some interesting news out of a Chinese camera company that I wonder if it's maybe a trend. We're also going to hear from our sponsor, Nutanix, and our guest this week is Tim Farah, who is the head of a company called TMF Associates. What's important about Tim is he's an expert on satellites, and we are going to be talking about the viability of satellite connectivity for IoT. Tim's not into it, and he's predicting the failure of several companies. So you're going to want to stay tuned for this. And now, a message from another one of our sponsors. This week's episode is sponsored by DigitalOcean. The DigitalOcean Developer Cloud simplifies modern app creation by combining the power of simplicity, love for the developer community, an obsession for customer services, and the advantages of open source. IoT businesses love DigitalOcean for their simple, predictable, pay-as-you-go pricing for cloud infrastructure services. With flat rates across all data centers, DigitalOcean makes it easy to scale up and expand globally without being surprised by your cloud bill each month. Get started for free with a $50 DigitalOcean credit at do.co/Stacy. That's do.co/Stacy. Okay, Kevin, it's time for water meters and water monitoring. So, Fin is a company that we have talked about a whole bunch. I've even had people from this company on the show as a guest. And this is a spin out from Belkin. And Uponor, which is a professional plumbing company, they, a couple years ago, created it was about $800 sensor, and it's since gone down to $699. But this was a sensor that a plumber installed on your water meter, and it monitored your home for leaks. Slow leaks, fast leaks, all kinds of leaks. And I loved it. I thought it was cool, and I thought it was way too much money. So what they've done now is created a $299 product that fits under your sink. It goes under the kitchen sink. So what you need to do, anyone can install it. You don't have to have a plumber. You unthread first you turn off your water. That's the first part. Sorry. Then you unthread the hot water line, the cold water line. You stick a sensor up on each side, and then you plug this thing in, which means you do need to have power under your sink. And voila, you now have something. It will monitor water flow. It cannot turn off the water if a leak is detected. So what you'll get is a series of alerts.
And that's very different from the $699 version, which does turn off your water.
Yes, but I think people really didn't want to pay that much money.
Yeah. I'm curious how it actually monitors the entire hot and cold water flow of the house just from that one set of pipes in the kitchen.
Algorithms.
Algorithms. They're our best friends.
This is my favorite answer. I'm like, oh, it's your secret magic algorithm. But what they've done is they've taken, and they do have a lot of research on how water flows through the house. They're basically using that research and the accompanying sensors to understand water pressure, water flow. And what's cool on this particular one, because they have both the hot and the cold water, and they're, I guess, inside the house, they can tell you a little bit more granularly what device is being used. So on the external expensive model, they can say, hey, a shower is running. But here they can actually tell you it's a shower in the master bedroom, or it's your teenager's shower. And holy cow, they're using all the hot water. So I thought that was kind of interesting. And this won't come out until September, but it's something I really want to try. because it sounds like it'll do most of what I want it to do. In worst case scenario, I can call my neighbor and be like, go turn off the water. It's leaking.
Yeah, it's obviously much more cost effective. And I wonder if this has something to do with it, because on the product page, it says if you have a leak or abnormal usage, you get an alert. The Smart Water Assistant gives you the option to contact a plumber within minutes from the Fin app through our partnership with Home Advisor.
Oh, yeah, they do have that partnership. I mean, I don't think that's nefarious. If you want,
oh,
you
no,
have your own
nor do
plumber.
I. No.
I think that's good. But yeah, I do think.
I just wonder if that's another revenue stream, that partnership, and that can help keep the cost lower than it would have been without it.
I think the thing that keeps the cost as low as possible is the fact that you don't have a motor that's turning a valve, which is
the shutoff. Right?
Yeah, that's a very expensive thing to do. And you have to over-engineer it because you're essentially dealing with the water into people's homes. So you don't want to screw that up.
Right.
So yeah, I'm excited. I am one of those weird people who don't have power under my sink. So I'm going to have an electrician come in and install an outlet. Most people will because they've got a garbage disposal. This is something I talked about actually when I installed the Madam A powered faucet thing, the Delta faucet. And they were like, yeah, not everybody has power. And I was like, I ran under my sink and I was like, I do, score. But in my new house, I don't. So I'm a little sad, but I do have a junction box for my dishwasher.
Mm-hmm.
If you're in a place that doesn't have a dishwasher or a garbage disposal, I'm going to bet you don't have power under your sink. And, this may not work.
You should just move, basically.
It's just leave. Same if you don't have neutral wires, just go. Oh, it is terrible. But yeah, and if you're building a new house and this sort of thing sounds interesting to you, maybe you'll make sure there's power under your sink. I would also recommend power somehow behind your shower if you are interested in smart showers. That's Stacy's plumbing and electricity do go together tip for today. So this is a cool product. I'm excited to try it out. And I'm sure once I do, I will be able to tell you more. It's going to work, by the way, with Madam A, Google Assistant, and with IFT. Okay, moving over from under the sink technology, let's talk about lights, blinds. I was going to say no cameras, no action. This is a terrible segue, but we're sticking with it. IKEA, my favorite furniture store, has launched its Home Smart business as a separate business unit. And it will be headed by Bjorn Block, who's been on the show twice. So congratulations, Bjorn! Woo!
Yay.
All right. That feels about as celebratory as a Swedish person would get. I don't know.
I don't know. I actually did not realize that the IKEA smart home effort started back in 2012.
Yes, they've been doing this a while. And what's interesting about the Home Smart business, or what apparently was not its own business, was that the whole goal was not to actually create things that were connected to the internet. It was to integrate technology into things like furniture. So things like, remember they have that table that does wireless charging?
Right. Yep. I do remember that.
So, they probably came to our attention mostly with the trod-free lights.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, I did not say that right. I did not have enough odd in my free. But they have since really focused on, and they have a very different idea. It's not just adding connectivity. It's like, hey, how can we make products in the home and furniture in general easier to use? And that is their core philosophy, which is why they've made some of the decisions they've made around things like connectivity technologies, the fact that the trod-free lights are their own system and not, you have to have all of that work together. It doesn't integrate out with other stuff, although it does work with Madam A or HomeKit and all of these others.
And I think they're one of the few, call them smart home companies, because they now have a home smart unit. And this makes sense. This is almost obvious, that puts design into these products in a different way, because the products typically, A, they look like IKEA products, and B, they don't look like smart home products, right? They fit naturally in the home.
Yes. And I thought this was really nice. When I went to IKEA and talked to them about this, they also have a sustainability focus that most companies probably don't have. So they're not going to make connected things that just get thrown away. They have certain expectations. For anything that's connected, it has to have a certain shelf life, and these won't go obsolete in a year. So that's kind of nice, I think, and probably really important. But for all of us who are waiting for those IKEA smart blinds, the future, or I can't remember how to say it. Anyway.
Yeah, I'll leave that to you.
I'll leave that to you to mess up, Stacy. But they will not be HomeKit compatible at launch. And this is going to disappoint people.
Yeah, this actually happened with the Trod-free smart plug because that was going to support HomeKit at launch, but it was like a 6-month delay before it got that support. So it's kind of unfortunate that this is becoming a trend, but regardless, if you buy these with the promise of HomeKit, I'm sure it will happen. It's just not going to happen when the blinds actually launch.
Which is fine because the blinds were already a little delayed. I think we were expecting them in April, and now they're in the fall. Hopefully they will stick to that fall deadline date, whatever. But I'm excited. I liking the IKEA smart things. I actually like my Trod-free lights. I put them back in after they fixed their Google integration. And that's something that we probably don't say enough, but we probably should say more often on the show. With connected home products, if you don't like it, wait 6 months and a software update's going to come along and probably make it a lot better.
You'll just love it. Wait 6 months.
I'm not saying that like is a...
No, you're right.
Not
you're
quite
right.
like that. Like
these are not static products, which is nice. In most cases, there are some times when we lose functionality with a software update, but in most cases, it does get better. I agree.
Let us talk about improvements, losing functionality, and software updates, shall we, Kevin?
Oh, let's. Yeah. For those who do not know, you can now migrate your Nest account to a Google account. This was announced back in May that would be happening at the Google I/O event where they rebranded some of the Google Home products to become Nest products, specifically the Nest Hub and the Nest Hub Max.
They're killing the Works with Nest program. It's probably
right.
So that's what they said. Originally, they were like, we're going to kill the whole thing, just dead, poof, gone as of August 31st. People freaked out because legitimately that's a big news to take in. So now what they're doing is they're offering you a choice. You can migrate your stuff over, your Nest stuff into your Google Assistant, Google Home stuff. You migrate all that over to your Google account. Or you can maintain your Nest account, but after August 31st, it's going to be static and nothing will change, which means it won't get better. Software updates aren't going to happen there, etc.
Correct. And if you don't want to do this, if you don't want to migrate your Nest account into your Google account, let's put it this way. If you do it after August 31st, if you do migrate it, you can't go back. So
wait, if you migrate it before 31st, you can go back?
Let me put it this way. You can't go back.
Okay.
I don't think I can go back because I did this. I ran through the process and I'm flabbergasted, quite frankly, because Nest has been a part of either Google or Alphabet or Google again for 5 years. Clearly, Google has all of our smart home information that we've put into our Google accounts with Google Home and Google Assistant. And Nest has the information from all the Nest products. And yet, the process to migrate from a Nest account to a Google account, it's a little daunting. It's actually very easy, but it's like 9 steps, and there's all kinds of little gotchas and things that I'm concerned about. Not everybody will have the same concerns because we don't all have the same products. But for example, I have the Nest by Yale lock, and as soon as I migrated my account, I had to invite my family to be part of the new Google account for the home. And until they accept that, they can't get in the front door because their passcode is no longer good. They're going to get a new entry passcode once they migrate. And my family is not too quick on the uptake for these things. So I haven't even invited them to the new home yet. I'm just going to let them ring the doorbell today, I guess. The other issue that I see is that Google says that all home members have the same level of access as control as you, meaning me, who used to be the homeowner in this system. Now anybody can delete me in my home or invite other people to our home. And I don't think that's a very good idea, but that's just me. So it just seemed like so many steps were taken here that could have been shortcutted because the information is already available in Nest and Google. And I'm just shocked.
I'm just flabbergasted. So I will say, I wondered when hearing about your experience with everyone having admin rights, I wonder if this was a response to some of the domestic abuse complaints or people using the smart home to control their spouses. And this puts control right back if they're going to invite them in. Now, if you really want to control your spouse, I guess you just leave them locked out at all times. So maybe you just never invite them in. But that's one thought is
you just give them a guest passcode for the door lock, tell them that they were part of the home even when they're not. I mean, there's ways around that. I think you're partially right. I don't know if there were other legal reasons or I don't know.
And we should say that the reason we suspect Google is doing this is because it was very complicated to manage all these integrations from two different points. So now what's going to happen is instead of having a Nest brain and a Google Home brain, you're going to have one Google Home brain be the entire experience, which
makes sense.
It does. It makes sense. It's going to make Google's life easier. It's going to make controlling who has access to certain APIs way easier and that sort of thing. But
Sure.
It is going to frustrate users who maybe relied on Nest having its own brain to tie into other products and systems, like IFT, for example.
Right. And there's no solution yet for this new, I guess, works with Google for IFT, for example.
Right. Everything's going to be now controlled through the Google Home account. So things like Nest temperature triggers and things like that will stop working if you migrate over and you rely on IFT for those things. So if you've
Correct.
got a sensor that says, hey, when my Nest thermostat is 60 degrees, turn on my space heater, those things are going to break. And it's not clear if Google's going to allow the same triggers as part of Google Home.
Right. Now, if you don't do this migration, it will still work.
Right. So,
But eventually they're going to, let's put it this way, you can manually do this now right in your Nest app, which isn't going away. Your point about having all the APIs and everything in one place makes sense, but yet we still have two apps, which I don't really get, but that's a whole other issue entirely. You can manually migrate to your account now, or you can wait for your quote unquote invitation email, which is probably going to be, you have to do this at some point now.
yeah, and I think August 31st is the changeover date. I'm glad you did this. I've seriously been weighing this. I'm like, oh, Kevin and I should talk about who's going to migrate. Maybe I shouldn't migrate. And then I'll see how deprecated my life gets is one way to do it. The challenge I have is I no longer have some of my Nest gear because I had a Nest Hello doorbell. I had a Nest thermostat. In a rental house, I have none of these things.
Right. It made sense for me to do it because we were pretty much all in on the Google Home ecosystem here. And I do have the Nest Hello doorbell as well as the Nest by Yale lock. So it just made sense.
For an Echo device.
That's where I was going next.
Yeah.
So, and this would be you because you're more on the Echo side of things. And this was a big hoo-ha when Google announced this back in May. Basically, the Madam A integrations would stop working, skills and such. However, they took that feedback to heart, and along with announcing the migration, they announced that there is a new Madam A skill. I have not installed it yet, but that should allow you to use Madam A with your Google Nest products.
All right. Well, we'll look forward to next week hearing your experience on that. Ha Speaking of Madam A, Amazon wants Madam A in every car, according to Bloomberg. This is not surprising. Amazon is in talks with automakers to put Madam A in cars. I don't know how else to say that. And they have already signed up. Who did they sign up?
BMW and Audi.
BMW and Audi. I wanted to say somebody else, so thank you. So they've already signed up BMW and Audi. So it's basically like, how you have CarPlay and Android. I always forget what Android's car thing is. Is it?
Android Auto.
Android Auto. And you would also have Madam A. What I really found fun about the story is they talked to a guy who had the Amazon Echo Auto, which I have had, and it just did not work for me. And I felt a little bad about that because, I really hate when I have a product that has no redeeming features.
That's how this article actually starts because the person who tested it talked about all the bugs and issues and basically said, am I part of a beta program? I don't understand why that product does not work because it's connected to your phone where the Madam A app is. The Madam A app is driving all the smarts and everything else. It's just a speaker microphone with a Bluetooth connection to your phone.
Yeah, but that Bluetooth connection is so dodgy. It doesn't seem to work as well. I think having the app on all the time causes problems. There's a lot of issues. And I think the car environment is difficult. You've got road noise, you've got car speaker noise, you've got all of that. So, but really, I'm going to say 90% of the problems we had with our Echo Auto in my husband's car and in mine were related to connectivity. And there's a lot of variables. There's so many different types of cars. There's so many different types of phones. You put all those permutations together and that's a lot, but it was not a good experience. I was sort of part of the beta program because I will say I did get a survey the other day and it was from Amazon. It was like, tell us about your experience with this as we seek to make it better. So having it integrated in the car should solve some of those problems.
It definitely should, because most people who use these in-car entertainment systems, whether it's built in from the manufacturer or it's Android Auto or CarPlay, they work pretty darn well. So,
people are like, why do you need your Echo in the car? And the answer is, you probably don't, but all right, the answer is probably you don't. I like it because at least once during every car trip, we have a question that we're like, oh, how many is this? And then we just don't know. And yes, we could squeeze our phone, or I could squeeze my phone and ask Google, and sometimes I do. But sometimes it's just nice to not have to pick up a phone while you're driving and just to say, hey, do this. Or, and yes, I know I could also talk on my phone. It's usually in my purse. It's usually not listening. I don't know.
Yeah,
Kevin's like, I don't understand why you don't just talk to your phone.
No. I mean, well, let's put it this way. Obviously, yes, you could talk to your phone. We could have done that before all these integrations came into play. But the speakers and microphones in these in-car systems are probably better suited for that kind of use. Hands-free, number one. And so I just plug my Pixel 3 XL into my car and just use the in-car stuff that integrates through Android Auto. I mean, it works flawlessly.
Yeah, and that's really what I want and hoped for. But like I said, maybe in 6 months, it's going to be amazing. Or maybe Amazon will do these deals and it will totally deprecate the product and nothing will change. So maybe I spent $25 just to be disappointed. Sigh. All right. Let's talk about SimpliSafe, which is a home security company. I'm sure lots of you guys have. It's very popular. It's easy to install. And now they have a brand new door lock.
Yes, it's $99. It will be available next month directly from SimpliSafe. Later, it will come to Best Buy, I think in October. Keypad on the outside and a very August lock-like look inside to me.
Is it round?
It's definitely got round design features, yes, without a doubt. It just reminds me of the August lock, but...
Is it a deadbolt lock? Or is it is it an actual lock that you install, or is it just a deadbolt turner? Because the August lock is a deadbolt turner as opposed to like a full integrated lock.
This looks to me like a integrated deadbolt. Because it's...
Then that's an actual lock.
Does not look like it fits over an existing one. But the interesting thing is, it will automatically lock when you set your SimpliSafe home alarm, which is kind of nice. The one downside is that if you want to use an app to unlock your door, then you're going to have to be part of the company's monthly remote monitoring service, which is $25 a month. So, yeah,
but
if you're
that
not...
also gives you remote monitoring.
That's true. That's true.
Okay,
but
I was like, $25 a month to unlock my door with my phone?
No. But for people who don't use the monitoring, they are either going to choose to pay for the monitoring to unlock by app, or they're just not going to use that feature at all because it's not free.
Yeah, they probably just won't buy the lock. That's my guess.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I'll keep that in mind. We also have a brand new breakthrough in energy harvesting, which is really important because if we're going to have a gajillion sensors everywhere, we cannot spend the time changing batteries. I don't care what people tell you about battery life. Even if it's every 10 years, you're either going to toss that sensor because it's cheap enough and environmentally friendly, or you're going to need something that's energy harvesting because we're not going to do that. So MIT has created an underwater sensor that does not need batteries. It is exciting. Its energy harvesting method, it's using piezoelectric, which is physical kinetic energy. So when something moves, it creates energy. That's my non-scientific version of that for everyone who doesn't want, real science. But they're using that, and backscatter. And this is basically when RF, so radio waves, or in this case, acoustical waves, are sent through the water, they generate energy. And the piezoelectric sensor converts that energy to a 0 or 1. And once we're in zeros and ones, we're digital, and voila, we can do things with it. This is actually pretty old school. Both technologies are well researched. Piezoelectric sensors have been around forever. I actually have one in my Hue tap, and I love it. Every time I tap it, it generates enough energy to keep that thing powered. And backscatter is something that's been around as long as there have been radio waves, I guess.
Yeah.
But we've been talking about harvesting it for energy for the last decade or so, and we're getting better and better at it. The cool part of this is we could use this both on Earth, underwater in places, but we could also use it for space exploration and putting sensors in place that can generate their own energy. So, if we're getting crazy, we can talk about, the article talks about putting it on Titan, which is Saturn's largest moon, because there is a giant subsurface ocean and we know nothing about it. We could drop one of these in there and voila, we could get information.
Just keep in mind, you're not going to get a lot of information at one time. I saw that this was 3 kilobits per second across up to 10 meters.
Yes. Well, these acoustical waves, they don't have that much power. Come on.
I get it.
It's like blowing on something as opposed to having a turbine engine. But, it still works.
It's something.
It's something. I should say, because I'm so obsessed with energy harvesting, I know there are also other efforts for underwater sensors that use temperature gradient differences. Basically, there's something called the benthic column, where you've got cold water at the bottom and warm water at the top, and it moves, it rotates. So those kind of things are also being used to power underwater sensors, those temperature changes. So there's actually a lot of really cool work happening here. And I mean, again, not going to send a lot of data, but maybe we shouldn't be so data hoggy anyway. All right. I think this might be our final story. I got some news that Dahui, which is a Chinese IP camera manufacturer, these cameras are everywhere. They just signed a deal with a company here in the US called Pepper IoT. Pepper is an IoT platform company that provides the cloud computing and underlying device management and all that fun stuff. What's notable here is this is a Chinese company that is specifically moving to use a US-based platform that is optimized for security. Pepper has actually done a deal with a IoT security company that has certified and keeps pen testing and monitoring their platform as a way to ensure that devices on this platform aren't bad actors. So I thought this was notable because most Chinese companies, they might do it themselves. They might use something like Tuya, but this seems like a real security play. And since it's an IP camera company, I thought it was worth noting since IP cameras are some of the worst offenders. So I don't know. Maybe this is a trend. Maybe it's not. But now I feel maybe a little better about buying Dahui cameras, which you can buy on Amazon. And they are much cheaper than Nest cameras. I think it's about time for our voicemail. What do you think, Kevin?
That sounds good.
Okay, for this section of the IoT Podcast Hotline, I should let everyone know that if you call us this month, you are competing to win an Ecobee Smart Light Switch with Madam A. Wah-wah! I really enjoy my wah-wah! It's very exciting. If you want to be entered to win, or if you have a pressing question you would like us to maybe answer it, give us a call at 512-623-7424. And I should let you know the IoT Podcast Hotline is sponsored by Affero. With the 5th largest IoT patent portfolio in the world, Affero provides a proven IoT platform that doesn't risk your brand. Affero customers have experienced as much as an 80% reduction in time to market and 10x higher activation rates. You can learn more at affero.io. This week's question comes from Joshua, who is shopping at Walmart. Let's hear it.
Yes, my name is Joshua. I'm calling about a smart light switch. At Walmart, I've seen some by a company called Mercury Innovations. Either Mercury Innovations or Genie. I really don't know which is which. I don't see a lot of information about them online, and I'm just trying to see if you guys have heard anything or even tried them out. They seem to be a pretty good price, but I'm not sure if it's worth the money to even try it. If you could let me know, I'd appreciate it. Thank you very much.
Oh, Joshua, I'm glad you asked this because I noticed probably a year ago or so that Walmart had this whole brand, and I did a little bit of research into it, and I was like, aha, this is a company that the products, I actually bought a connected outlet. I was like, a light switch. No, not that. An outlet, place where you plug in things, and downloaded the app. The app is all right. It's not awesome. There's nothing, it's not terrible, but it's not great.
The app is the Genie part that Joshua had asked about because he was unsure of the name. Is it Mercury Innovations? Is it Genie? But Genie is the app.
Genie is the app. And it's a fine product from that standpoint. I will say that the company underlying Mercury Innovations, or the platform, is a company called Tuya, which is a Chinese company. They also do tons of business. They're, I think, probably the second most popular, maybe now the most popular IoT platform out there. And those guys, they are based in China. So you're going to see traffic from your Mercury Innovations products going to China because of the Tuya connection. It is up to you to decide how you feel about that. I didn't see anything horribly problematic, but I am also not a security researcher.
I think for a light switch, I'd probably be okay with that. I know they make other products such as cameras and such. Me personally, would be a little more concerned, but light switch in this case, I'd be okay with it.
There's two issues, right? There's the issue of them controlling or seeing the data from your light switch. The other issue is that could create a hole in your network through which they could go to your
to see other things.
Yeah.
Ooh, that's bad.
I'm not saying that they can. I'm saying that would be your worst case.
Yep.
The point here is these are cheaper devices. Tuya has been responsive to security vulnerabilities. So, and I hate to be like a Chinese fearmonger, right? I feel questionable about that, but at the same time, I'm also like, it's not completely outlandish to be aware of that, I guess. So be aware of that. The experience is okay. There's nothing terribly fabulous or terrible about it. I have that same feeling actually when I work with TP-Link's Casa line of stuff, to be honest.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's on par with that, maybe a little less smooth, a little less fancy or gloss.
Yeah, but you're just paying for utility here. I mean, this is $18.88 for a Wi-Fi switch. You don't need a hub. It works with Madam A, Google Assistant, and even Cortana if you use Cortana in the home.
Which no one does. They're phasing Cortana out of the home, so that's not going to matter for too much longer. I can't wait to find out more about that because I'm sure you saw this, but Microsoft hired Bill Stasior, who is the guy in charge of Siri. And so I was really excited about this. I'm like, oh man, is he going to be doing something cool with Cortana? Maybe.
Did he do anything cool with Siri? I don't know. I just say that because I find it to be the worst of the big three assistants.
Okay. Yeah, that's true. Well, all right, fine. We'll find out. He's going to be heading up an AI group for Microsoft, so who knows? But it does say he'll, quote, work to help align technology strategies across the company. So maybe Cortana will get integrated into more Microsoftian products, and maybe we'll finally see some of the cool stuff they keep showing us around voice in the enterprise. We'll see.
Yeah.
All right. That feels like a bunch of news that was fun to talk about, but it's time for us to move on to our guest. This week's guest is Tim Farah of TMF Associates. We're going to be talking about the likelihood of all of these IoT satellite companies, even the small sat companies. How likely is it that they will succeed? So stay tuned for that after a message from our sponsor. Hey everyone, we are taking a quick break from the Internet of Things podcast for a message from our sponsor. This week's sponsor is Nutanix, and I have Sachin Vagani here from Nutanix here to talk to us. Sachin, IoT is projected to be more than $1 trillion market by 2025. What are the obstacles in the way of that actually happening?
Stacy, there's two kinds of obstacles, technical and non-technical. On the technology side, IoT is a combination of many different technology challenges. Challenges around containerizing applications using advanced data processing concepts like AI and data analytics. It's about application and device security at literally planet scale, and so on and so forth. These technical challenges translate to non-technical challenges for an organization as well. They feel stretched in terms of the type of talent that they need to onboard to make an IoT project successful. They need a combination of talents around Kubernetes and TensorFlow and data processing and security and so on, which stretches their budgets on a given IoT project or even stretches the amount of time and resources they need to dedicate to them.
Got it. I have heard that's a problem. So what is Nutanix working on to get rid of these obstacles?
We're up to many different things, but just to give you some concrete examples, in one instance, we created an AI service on the edge to remove the complexity of end users having to deal with many different kinds of AI hardware ranging from ASICs to FPGAs to GPUs, such that they can focus more on the business logic and on the machine models that they can train and less on how those models need to be operationalized in production. In another instance, we worked with many of our industry partners, ISVs and systems integrators, to create an IoT application library, which provides our end users end-to-end working IoT applications in many different verticals, such that they can get started on reasonably complex IoT projects, literally in one click. And in a different instance, we created an IoT trial for edge computing infrastructure, all hosted in the cloud, so that people can start creating enterprise IoT applications on the edge without having to deploy a single device.
Nice. That's very comprehensive. So where can our listeners go to find out more about Nutanix?
Stacy, we'd welcome your listeners to come visit us at nutanix.com/IoT and even sign up for a free trial.
Hey everyone, welcome back to the Internet of Things podcast. This is your host, Stacey Higginbotham, and today's guest is Tim Farah, who is president of TMF Associates. He has done consulting in the satellite industry for over 25 years, and I have talked to him for probably the last 20 years on various satellite issues. So, Tim, thanks for joining me today.
Thanks, Stacey.
I am super excited to have you. We're going to be talking about IoT and satellites as promised. So let's kick it off with an understanding of where does satellite fit into the IoT? I always think of, hey, maybe it could be good for obviously remote areas with no connectivity, but also things like tracking pallets across the ocean. What do you think?
Well, I think the idea of extending connectivity everywhere is a really important thing to consider for many customers, but the question about whether they want to pay for it is a particularly relevant issue. And if you go back 25 years, everyone then was talking about satellite phones and saying, oh, we want our mobile phone to work everywhere. We're going to have a satellite component in there. We'll roam onto that whenever we go outside coverage. And what happened in the end? Well, people didn't really want to pay for it. They were attracted by the idea of a phone that worked anywhere. But when it came to a more expensive phone with a big antenna and having to pay a lot for the roaming time, and they only went outside coverage a very small percentage of the time, in the end, the market turned out to not be very exciting. People didn't roam onto satellite, and people used it if they were in a disaster or they were in a war or other, situations where they're out in the middle of the ocean, but they didn't use it as a sort of everyday feature of their mobile phone. And IoT, satellite connectivity is much the same. I think 10 years ago, people were saying, okay, well, people use satellite as a backup to terrestrial. They roam onto that. We can incorporate it into all these IoT devices. And what's happened is that terrestrial has advanced by leaps and bounds. The cost of satellite equipment, the cost of satellite airtime is still a great deal higher than it is on the terrestrial side. And it remains to be seen whether there's enough need for satellite to justify adding in that satellite capability. Now, if you're transporting nuclear fuel around the country, you probably want to know where it is every minute of the day. But if you're transporting pallets of food around the country, then maybe it's not quite so important and not so much worth paying for.
Exactly. I'm like, oh, my container of $5 t-shirts, it fell into the ocean. That's all right. Okay, so before we go much deeper, I feel like it's probably important to talk about the costs associated with satellites. This will give us a good context for when we switch from like the traditional to some of the small sats that we'll get to in a bit. Break all that down for me, please.
Satellites are designed specifically for IoT. The classic, old-time system has been Orbcomm, where they have relatively small satellites. They spend something like $200 million on building their latest system, and it's really only good for small amounts of data. In contrast, you have satellites that are more generally adaptable, Iridium being a classic example where they've just spent about $3 billion upgrading their system, but IoT is only a small part of their total offering, and they have most of their business from mobile phones and a growing proportion from broadband offerings. In both of those cases, they are looking to drive IoT revenues to pay for the cost of their systems, and the amount of capacity on those satellites, well, they're a long way away. The beams are pretty big. The amount of spectrum is very limited. And so there's a very small amount of capacity compared to what you might have on a 3G or 4G or 5G network on the ground. And when we're talking about the cost to the end user, you also need a relatively higher power terminal. You have complex electronics because you've got to deal with a non-standard band, a non-standard interface. All of those things mean that you're talking about terminal costs which start at something like $100 for the transceiver, but once you put it into a terminal, it's hundreds of dollars. And you're talking about airtime costs, which today are generally in the range of thousands of dollars per megabyte for many of the services, because you're paying by the message, and a message of a few bytes might cost you several cents or even perhaps 10 or 20 cents a message.
And that's been the big, marketing push by the satellite providers, which is, yeah, sure, we're expensive if you want to use us for like LTE data services, but if you've got like a single message that goes out once or twice a day, that's just a few bytes, it's relatively inexpensive. What I'm hearing, though, is on the receiving side and the radio side and the device, that's still probably going to add a lot of cost to the device.
Well, it depends what you need. If your application is being designed to take advantage of LTE and you're looking at transmitting perhaps several megabytes a month, then you really have to do something pretty different to make use of satellite. When you're paying, by the message and you're paying multiple cents or 10 cents per message, then you really need to be just sending the most crucial data. So one of the challenges has been that, maybe 10 to 15 years ago, satellite and terrestrial, when we had 2G on the ground, GPRS, satellite wasn't so far behind, and you could maybe implement the same application for your satellite and your terrestrial link, and things would be simpler. Now you have to implement something that's quite different for satellite in many cases, and that means that there's an extra burden on the end user to really decide whether they want to go to that trouble, both on the software side and on the hardware side, in adding the cost of a satellite transceiver.
All right. We have talked in the past about some of the bigger classic satellite providers who have these giant birds in constellations way up there in space. What we're seeing now is a launch of small sats. And every time I talk to somebody who's talking about launching a bunch of small sats for the IoT, and the idea is these tiny satellites, you could just toss them up, they're cheaper, they fly closer to the ground, and they're going to just change the world. Talk to me about how I should be looking at those, because some of them actually seem really compelling.
Satellites, have got more efficient, but it's important to note that Orbcomm was the original small satellite. Its original satellites launched back in the mid to late 1990s only weighed a few tens of kilograms. And yes, we're reducing from that to even smaller today, but the orbit of the low Earth orbit satellites, the capabilities are better. They still have to have access to the spectrum, which is a big barrier. And Orbcomm's fighting with some people who are trying to get shared access to its own band. Other people have talked about accessing other satellite bands which they don't necessarily have priority rights to access. They may have looked at things like unlicensed spectrum, where it's not really clear that the rules permit use of some of those unlicensed bands by satellite. So access to spectrum is a big barrier to entry. The technology is definitely improved, but things are not as different as you might assume. Maybe in the broadband world it is different, because there, most of the existing satellites are geostationary. We're talking about multi-ton satellites, and we're going down to a few kilograms. But in the LEO world, we've had Iridium and Orbcomm around for 20 plus years. They've got the spectrum rights and proven ability to operate. They've got sales channels and infrastructure in different countries around the world. And these new satellites, will they be sufficiently different? Well, I don't even know if all of them will get the rights to operate in terms of access to the spectrum. That's a big area of pressure on access to satellite spectrum. There's just not as much available for dedicated satellite purposes as there might have been in the past. So a lot of this comes back to spectrum. Even if your technology is advanced, do you have the rights to operate? Can you get access? And can you deliver a compelling service? Building the infrastructure, building the distribution, getting people to adopt it is all challenging as well.
All right, spectrum, I will keep that in mind as like the big scary thing to look at. I will say, I feel like on the distribution side and getting costs down, or maybe it's just a marketing channel, but when I look at deals like Amazon working with Iridium on that $3 billion upgrade, for example, for IoT, that feels like perhaps a really significant sales channel. I'm curious how you look at some of these partnerships that are coming out. Is that going to help change the name of the game?
Well, I think it really depends on how customers decide to use satellite capability. If satellite stays as that last resort solution, just like your satellite phone is, and it's something you leave in the cupboard and you take out when you're going out to the middle of the ocean, or you're transporting your nuclear fuel cargo around the country or whatever, then that pretty much hems in the market. If it becomes something where it's a more widely accepted part of your everyday infrastructure and you can roam onto satellite, then maybe things change. But it's not clear that the economics have changed. Even if people have access to this and there's better distribution, there's better awareness, are the economics going to work to include this in people's everyday use of IoT? I don't know. I don't think we've seen that yet. In general, I would say terrestrial is advancing so fast that it's very, very difficult for satellite to keep up. Satellites in most areas has fallen further behind terrestrial expectations in the last 20 years rather than getting closer to meeting terrestrial expectations. It might meet something that someone wants because it meets terrestrial expectations from 10 or 15 or 20 years ago, but it doesn't keep pace with what's the latest is on the terrestrial side in terms of the capabilities.
Okay, and in terms of those capabilities, are you talking about things like data rates? Or, again, the biggest argument that people make that satellite can actually win with IoT is because they're relatively few and relatively small messages. And I guess you're saying that the economics just still don't make sense there because they're relatively few and relatively small messages.
Right, and those messages are expensive to convey. If on the terrestrial world IoT really shifts to a very intermittent transmission of very small amounts of data, then certainly satellite could meet that. But the idea of shifting to that small amounts of intermittent data is that the cost goes to a very, very low amount, both for the hardware and for the airtime. And so, when we're talking about satellite looking to get ARPUs in the multiple dollars per month, and we're looking at hardware costs which are in the hundreds of dollars in general, then it's very difficult to converge even if you can deliver the small messages that people are looking for, unless there is a specific reason for that application to pay a premium.
I think there will be a market for that, but I don't understand how broad that will be. And you're right. There are already workarounds for things like containers at sea and tracking those. A lot of the times they're like, yeah, we'll just put something like a LoRaWAN situation at a port. And as the ships come near it enough, they're like, yep, they're still there. And then they move on. So I share your skepticism in a lot of ways.
That's not to say that there isn't significant growth here. We have several million terminals out there operating on satellite network. But if you look at, for example, some of the applications that have been mooted in the past, that idea of tracking cargo at sea, well, it turns out containers are stacked on the deck, one on top of one another. And if your satellite terminal, which needs to see the satellite going overhead in the sky, is on the bottom of a stack of 3 or 4 containers, then there isn't an ability to make a line of sight to the satellite. And so ideas that everything will be direct via satellite have transmuted into, for example, using short-range wireless on board the ship, transmitting it to a terminal on the ship, which is a single VSAT terminal, sending it back to a regular satellite. Although that's IoT, and although it's going via satellite, that's not what most people are thinking about when they're thinking about satellite IoT.
You're right. That is not what they're thinking. But that as a gateway, kind of as a bridge technology, makes a lot of sense. Plus, most ships already have satellite links on them because, hey, They're ships out in the middle of the ocean. All right, Tim, I know this is a little out of your purview, possibly, but I am curious for everyone who listens, and every time I write about satellites, everyone's like, space trash! What about it? All these small satellites, they're going to be a problem. Do you have a take or possibilities of dealing with this?
Well, I think that there is a move towards deploying smaller and smaller satellites because of the higher capabilities available from miniaturized electronics. Operators who might be fairly unsophisticated in terms of satellite because they've come at this from the IoT world, they've come at it from the software world, they've said, okay, well, now we can build a satellite hardware to go up in space and maybe someone's going to offer them cheaper launches in the future. That will enable people to do things if they're not careful, which could cause problems in the future. And we've seen the FCC get pretty irate with a company that launched some small satellites without necessarily getting full permission. The FCC has resolved its disagreements there and things have moved forward. But there is a level of responsibility that is needed on the part of people who want to do things in space. And it's not a good idea to move fast and break things in space. If you do that, you are storing up a lot of problems for the future because a lot of these satellites will hang around for ages. And although people said, well, space is a big place, there's not that much of a likelihood of collisions. We had a collision of an Iridium satellite with a defunct Russian satellite about 10 years ago, which came as a massive shock to everyone. Since then, people have started to wake up, but as new people come into the industry without necessarily the history, thinking that they can do new clever things with miniature satellites, they do have to be careful and not store up problems for everyone else.
Wise words. I wish we had followed them here on the ground, actually, for a while. So, all right. What is the big news for this coming year? What are the things that you are looking at in the satellite industry that you actually think are interesting or worth monitoring?
What we've got a lot of focus on is efforts by potential new entrants. We've got a lot of interest being paid to Elon Musk's SpaceX. They are launching their constellation that they've called Starlink. They launched 60 satellites a few months ago. They're planning to have a couple more launches before the end of the year and then more launches next year. That's really an effort to accelerate broadband, and those efforts are progressing fast. People look at broadband as a multi-billion-dollar market. What's getting less attention are that many of the smaller satellites where people are looking at predominantly IoT focus, there have been some struggles. Sky and Space Global is one that made a big splash a year or so ago with the launch of their first 3 satellites. They talked about capabilities in IoT, things that they could offer in Nigeria and other places. And they have run into financial challenges in terms of getting the money that they need to complete their constellation. And I think if you go back to the sort of Starlink situation, they're in a race with OneWeb, who've been around for a few more years, who are also now planning to launch dozens of satellites over the next few months and hundreds over the next couple of years. That race to launch these multi-billion-dollar broadband constellations in some ways is sucking the oxygen out of the market for some of these smaller satellite constellations. Those people may only need to raise tens or a couple of $100 million. But if everyone's paying attention to the big players and everyone's worried about SpaceX and also what Amazon might do next with their own planned broadband constellation, they worry that these small players will get crushed and that they'll struggle to deploy. Because it's a very new set of applications in IoT. No one quite knows how big that market is going to be, whether their new distribution partnerships will materialize in terms of revenue generation. And it's easy to look at broadband and say, okay, well, that's a multi-billion-dollar market already. We've got a couple of million people in North America already paying for satellite broadband. Maybe there'll be lots more of those over time, and say, okay, that's where we'll focus our money. And we like to bet on people like Elon Musk and Jeff Bezos, and maybe we're not going to give money to these more lower profile, smaller projects. And if that's the case, then people are going to run into the sand over the next year or 18 months. And I think we're on the point at which we may see some failures of these small players over the next 12 months or so, which would be a bad sign. If we see something bigger than that and we see a major multi-billion-dollar proposed system fold, then that would be even worse. But I think we're at a point where some of these small players need to put up or shut up and raise multiple tens of millions of dollars in the very near term. And there are some signs that there are struggles going on there at the moment.
And what happens when a satellite company goes out of business? What happens to their constellation? I know a lot of these only have, done some kind of demo launches, but they still have stuff up there.
Yes, that's right. And to some degree, they do have a level of responsibilities for deorbiting spacecraft if they have launched things into orbit. They may have spectrum rights. And as we talked about before, things like LightSquared and TerreStar try to monetize their spectrum rights and convert it to terrestrial spectrum. There may be some efforts that go on here for people who have satellite spectrum rights want to monetize it terrestrially if they can't make a business out of the satellite side. We're still to see how that comes about and how that develops. But if these people get to a point where they don't believe they can fund their satellite business, they may merge with other people who might be able to take advantage of their license. Or as I say, they may try something like converting their satellite license to a terrestrial license in certain countries if that's viable.
Got it. Well, Tim, thanks so much for coming on the show this week. I really have learned a lot, and I appreciate you taking the time.
Thanks, Stacey. It's been great.
That's it for this week. Thanks so much for listening. And remember, if you'd like more IoT news, sign up for my newsletter at stacyoniot.com. We'll see you next week.